Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Shred the Veil. We're doing something a little different here today. Today, Derek and I have our dad here with us, Ray to Steven, and we're very excited to shred the big fat lie with him. And we're going to go in deep about the deception that's been going on for the last 70 plus years with respect to nutrition in the American society and what they've put out there and why they put it out there and what the real truth is of what we should be eating as humankind and how we've done so for the last thousands of years. So he's going to kind of shed some light on that and dispel some of these lies we've been told so we can know the real truth around nutrition. So without further ado,
Thank you. Thanks, Dan, Derek. Well, I've been a professional engineer in geotechnical and environmental engineering as of last week for half a century. So I cleared that barrier and I decided to move on to nutrition and now a certified nutritionist. Um, but I realized something going through the whole engineering career, and that is that professional engineers as well as doctors and professionals in the healthcare business, both have to go by a code of ethics. And so for doctors, it's the Hippocratic Oath, which is first do no harm. For engineers, as you guys well know, it's to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public. So very similar in those two in that regard, and we're supposed to protect the public. Um, I'm not going to go through my resume, but I've investigated over 100 damage studies. This is bridges, bulkheads, piers, ballards, buildings, and as an expert witness on about 2 dozen projects. So when I bring that reason I bring that up is because investigating failures is very similar to a doctor diagnosing a patient. First, you have to figure out what's wrong before you can help the patient or you can fix the problem in a building or a structure. So I'll just mention two projects. One is very first one I worked on, and it's the 26-story Skyline Plaza, and it collapsed, uh, killing 14 people and injuring 35 more.
wow.
And now, when that happened, I was still in graduate school, 1973, and but starting January 1975, when I started with the firm, um, first project I did had to go out in the field and improve some footing subgrades. It was for the rebuild of that building. So having heard the story about what happened there, I was pretty worried about, okay, am I going to do this right?
A little bit of pressure, huh?
And so, footings were supposed to be 6,000 pounds a square foot, and I'm poking a little, what we call a geo stick in the ground to see if it was good for 6,000 pounds per square foot. And anyways, that project maybe gave me the wherewithal and the awareness that, if we don't get things right, people can get killed, whether it's the contractor or the engineer. And it's the same thing with the medical profession. In this case, the contractor on the 23rd floor took away the forms for too early before the concrete set up, and it went down, pancaked it, hit the next slab, boom, 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 all the way down,
Yeah.
and killed all these people down below.
Wow.
So fast forward about 10, 11 years, and as you know, we moved to Westchester, Pennsylvania. So I was the northeasternmost office, started the office, and so in 1987, a 16-story L'Ambiance Plaza hotel collapsed in Bridgeport, Connecticut, killing 28 workers. And we were commissioned by at that time, the National Bureau of Standards. It's now called the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And the process they were using was a new technology called lift slab construction. So what they did was they build the columns. All the columns are sticking up, and they pour all the floor slabs on the ground, so you didn't have to form them in the air. Saved a lot of time and all that kind of thing. So they're lifting these things up, and all of a sudden, one collapsed, and the same thing happened, and all these workers got killed.
Oh, wow.
So we're called in. My charge is look at the foundations and say, okay, is anything they did wrong with the foundations that caused the problem in any way? So I looked at foundations and we drilled holes through the footings and showed some, like they left some uh, shot rock in the footings they should have cleaned out. But otherwise, the footings were on rock.
Mhm.
And I like to spin the hero and say, yeah, I found the answer, and it's the foundations, and they'd hail me as the great. But that didn't fit the facts. The facts weren't there. It was something with the connections to the from the slab to the columns, and so lift slab construction was banned in Connecticut and but not throughout the country. But there never was another lift slab constructor project since then. So in in the world of construction and engineering, you get a failure like that, and often it's like, okay, that's the end, or we change what we're doing, figure it out.
Learn from your mistakes and do something different.
Yeah, somehow in medicine, and I mean, again, in medicine too, you'll have some drug come out, and after 8 years, this shows how many people it's killing or whatever, and they finally ban the thing.
Right.
So they do it there too, but wow. Anyway, but anyways, from those projects, it hit me that, in fact, a professor, Jerry Leonard's a professor emeritus at Purdue, came to our office and gave a little talk on another damage study of some sort. He said something, this was 47 years ago, but he said something that stuck with me all the while. And it's that, um, and this statement is true in nutrition also, I say, but it says, if you are pursuing a theory and the facts don't fit the theory, you've got the wrong theory. And you got to start over and do something else. So that's like the Longbounds Plaza, the facts that I came up with that would say that theory is foundations were the problem. The facts didn't fit that. So I like to, like I say, been the big hero. I solved the problem, but I did. So, anyways, the same thing holds true with nutrition as it does in engineering,
Right.
and that's why I'd like to discuss with you today a theory that became one of the biggest scams in modern history, what I call the big fat lie, and that's a play on words. And with that, I guess we can go ahead and see what we got here.
Yeah. All right.
If I can teach you a little something about nutrition.
Let's do it.
All right.
Yeah. All right.
Good.
All right. I'd like to start out with a little jocularity, and so there's still hope. I woke up this morning determined to drink less, eat right, and exercise, but that was 4 hours ago when I was younger and full of hope. Okay, so with that, we'll carry on.
Great.
My CYA alert for you guys. First of all, I'm a nutrition specialist with American Academy of Sports Dietitians and Nutritionists. And this presentation does not represent their opinion or that of Shred the Veil podcast. Now, I read my manual and took the test and passed that to get my certificate. But meantime, about the last 20 years, I've been reading over 100 books on nutrition. So I kind of got my knowledge really from that. And things became crystal clear long before yesterday. It was pretty obvious what the problem is that we have. And here's the problem. Well, sobering statistics, actually. I mean, 75% of Americans are overweight or obese. That's huge. 3 out of 4 people when you think about it.
Yeah.
700,000 die annually from heart disease. Diabetes killed 100,000 in 2021. Affected 38 million people, with 100 million people had prediabetes in 2024. And those ravages of diabetes include peripheral neuropathy. That's where you don't get the blood flow to the extremities and are cutting off feet and legs.
Yeah.
Amputations, blindness, and kidney failure. You're sitting on a dialysis machine for the rest of your life. So the question is, how did we get here? And to answer that question, we have to go back, way back, and I'm talking about 6 or 7 million years. I want you to meet your ancestors, the hominins, which we are defined here as a species more closely related to living humans than to chimpanzees or apes.
Okay.
Now, the oldest known hominin species was found in the Sahara Desert of Chad in 2001, so fairly recently. And it got a complete cranium, teeth, jaw fragments, some bones. But like the apes and chimps and bonobos, they still ate mostly fruit, and they slept in trees, even though they came down out of the trees.
Mm-hmm.
And so here you see from our friends, the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History, Sahelanthropus tradensis, who lived about 6 or 7 million years ago. And clearly he doesn't look too human-like, and he's not at this point. Well, I'd like to meet their distant cousins, the Australopiths. Now, their dietary diversity accelerated dramatically about 4 million years ago due to climate change, where it actually got colder. So this cooling period was during the Pliocene geologic epoch of 5.3 to 2.6 million years ago. So instead of gorging on fruit and trees, these hominins had adapted to tough fibrous tubers, bulbs, roots, stems, seeds, and some insects. So they're molars because they had to. Now, if you can imagine taking the turnip today from the supermarket and just trying to gnaw on that, like as hard as a rock. So these guys, their molars like 3 times the size of ours, and the enamel thickness about 3 times the size. So they adopted to chewing this hard stuff. And you can see they weren't that big. Males were under 5 feet tall, 100 pounds. Females about 3 feet 7 average and 75 pounds.
Hmm.
So they've come up with about a dozen of these species of Australopiths so far. Here in the picture, Australopithecus afarensis lived 3 to 4 million years ago, and Australopithecus africanus 2.1 to 2.7 million years ago.
Okay.
So one of the defining features and one of the big changes towards becoming Homo sapiens was that of bipedalism. And here again, it's from Smithsonian, you see a rendering, or not actually a full-scale model, where the defining feature is a straight big toe for walking. So this allowed shift to walking upright, which was a major transformation in our human evolution. So standing and walking upright was selected for foraging long distances more effectively in the face of climate change. And these changes set the stage for the genus Homo.
Powerful big toe.
Oh, yeah. Changed everything. But it came with a price. So the disadvantages of bipedalism were loss of speed and agility. We also lost our ability to gallop. So most other animals on 4 legs can sprint way faster than us. So if you took Usain Bolt, our champion Olympic sprinter, he can go about 23 miles an hour, but for only no more than a half a minute. It gets you 200 meters. And then we're pooped. So, but many mammals can sprint twice that fast and for several minutes. And of course, without training or coaches, so they can do it rather quickly.
Very natural.
So if you look like 40-pound adult chimp, he can muster up twice the force of a brawny human. So let's say you took the Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, against a chimp, and you said, okay, we're going to sprint 100 yards, climb up a tree, come back down. The first one down wins. Mm-hmm. So the chimp would be to the tree, up the tree, back down, and Dwayne would just be getting the tree. He's reaching up for a branch, trying to figure out how to climb up and get a foothold so he can climb up to the first branch. So that's what we lost in becoming bipedalists, I guess you'd say. Well, we can blame this change on this climate change for our existence, actually, because 2.5 million years ago in the Rift Valley of East Africa, the forest had shrunk, woodlands became grasslands, fruit was scarce. We started foraging because we could stand and walk greater distances. It favored that. It also, climate change precipitated the evolution of hunting and gathering, along with the development of several species of Homo, which we'll talk about. So here you have depicted Homo erectus. This is again our buddies at the Smithsonian. And you have Homo erectus lived from 1.9 million years ago to 143,000 years ago. And they were probably our first ancestors that were characterized as significantly human. And what's interesting is these guys have been on the planet 6 or 7 times longer than we have.
Yeah, that's us.
So whereas Homo sapiens has been around for 300,000 years, these guys have been there 6 times, 7 times that.
Wow. Yeah.
Also depicted as Homo neanderthalensis, Neanderthals lived from 430,000 to about 40,000 years ago. And we think these guys are big dumb guys because they had a big brow and big nostrils. So that's because they lived up in Europe where it's colder climate. So they were skilled tool makers. They had big game hunters. They buried their dead, used pigments for decorations. They had basic language skills. But at this time, the region they lived in, the climate change of 2 million years ago, looked more like the set of Lion King that would have Tarzan. Now, the Neanderthals were bulkier. They were more muscular than sapiens. And they essentially were separate as a species, and they diverged genetically about 400,000 years ago.
Okay.
So as hominins scavenged, their brains grew. So due to scarcity of food, this led to riskier business scavenging animal carcasses. But we weren't the first in line by any means. First of all, the animals had their kill, and you can see in the lower left there, the lion devoured. What they did was they ate all the guts out. And you see they actually leave the hindquarters. They only eat the hindquarters if they were like starving. Mm. And then so the hyenas and jackals come along, they scavenge the carcass. Well, that didn't leave much for us. But when we came around, there's not much left except some skin and bone, you might say. But what our forte was cracking open the bones and skulls and eating the marrow and the brains.
Hmm.
So I also have depicted here a wolf kill from the series Yellowstone, where Rip declared they ate the guts out. It had to be wolves. But you can see this. Now, this is Hollywood's version of eating the guts out, but that's exactly what it would look like.
Okay, yeah.
So, till recently, 2012, in fact, we always thought that hominids had discovered fire maybe and controlled it about 30 to 50,000 years ago, until they found this little hominin campfire 780,000 years ago in northern Israel.
Wow.
It included burnt flint tools, about 40,000 fish remains. There wasn't hardly any bones because they had been cooked, so they didn't see the bones, but they saw like 95% teeth.
Hmm.
Now, cooked meat required less energy to chew and digest than raw fare. That's resulted in smaller teeth and a shorter intestinal tract.
Okay.
So cooking gave hominids more net calories for what they ate, and it killed, germs and parasites and that thing. So it was all a good thing. But it happened way, way earlier than we ever dreamed. Then comes Homo erectus, or upright man. So with the ability to sweat throughout our skin, which other animals didn't have, we could walk and run long distances. And we did what was called persistent hunting. So we would chase down an animal. He'd take off running way faster than us to get ahead of us. He'd stop and pant because nobody could pull themselves down as panting like a dog would.
Right, yeah.
With their tongue. And so we catch up to them again. They start running. They get ahead of us. We catch up. And now they're sitting there under the tree panting and they're overheated. They can't go. And we get up close enough and we can spear them or beat them over whatever we're going to do with them. So that's how we used to do it up to about 100,000 years ago. We introduced the bow and arrow. So about 500,000 years ago, stone spears and points were used in the bow and arrow. At 400,000 years ago, our ancestors now were able to take down large game. So hominids ate not only the brains and marrow, but offal, as we call it today, or organ meats. They eat the heart, the liver, the kidneys, the brains, and the intestines.
Mm.
And that, my friends, changed everything.
Okay.
With the addition of fat to their diet, Homo erectus grew to 6 feet tall and weighed about up to 150 pounds.
Okay, just with the addition of fat.
Yeah. So now we're called Homo sapiens, or wise man. So species are given a two-part Latin name. The species that evolved from a common ancestor are kind of bunched together under the heading genus, followed by the species name. So humans are the genus Homo, which means man, and the species sapiens means wise. Now, you don't think we'd have called ourselves dumb man, do you? So I'm not sure in Latin what the word for dumb is, but we went with wise. So
that's the next evolution.
Yeah.
That's where we're going.
So 300,000 years ago, various versions of Homo sapiens had evolved. With our larger brains, we soon jumped to the top of the food chain. Now we're eating large game. Now, by 70,000 years ago, sapiens had spread throughout Europe and Asia, and wherever wise men went, they displaced the hominids that were still in existence. So we displaced the Neanderthals, for example, in Europe and so forth. But we grew a brain, as they say. Some people come around and say, you say something dumb, they say, grow a brain, Dan. Right. Right. So we grew a brain. So with this high-fat, nutrient-dense diet starting around 2.4 million years ago, hominin brains grew dramatically. So here we got plotted brain size in cubic centimeters versus time back to 6 million years ago. So here we have the Australopithecus with a brain size of about 375 to 550 cubic centimeters. Mm-hmm. And you come up with Homo habilis, which I haven't talked about, handyman, little bigger brain, up to Homo erectus with a brain size of from 775 to 1225 cubic centimeters. Then modern humans, sapiens, and Neanderthals with a brain size of about 1,480 cubic centimeters.
So 3 times the size.
Yeah. So essentially what we did was, I'll call it brain drain. Our brains now took up 24% of our energy requirements, but only 2% of our volume. Sapiens essentially traded biceps for neurons, and there was no going back this time. So this was compensated for by a smaller gut, which only is about 65% of what our small intestines are today.
Mm.
I mean, what we used to have, I'll explain in a minute. So here's the Hadza of East Africa. They're a Neolithic hunter-gatherer tribe, lived in Central Rift Valley of East Africa. This is from the TV screenshots from the TV series Nova, Science and Nature series. And here the film crew is following a Hadza on a hunt where they kill the deer with a bow and arrow. Now they got this guy talking in this Hadza language, but he's saying they have the uh, what he's saying right there on the screen. And we Hadza, we love to take and fat and fry it up. And here it's sizzle. Now that's fat, brother. And here you see him with his highly prized delicacy, the liver, which is delicacy in many ancient tribes. Again, we're talking about the organs gave us the fat for survival, not meat.
Mm.
So the Hadza are living testament of among last 84 extant tribes of hunter-gatherers that studied who ate meat, fowl, fish, leaves, roots, and fruits. And none of these tribes lived a vegetarian life, by the way. And this data is pretty much incontrovertible.
Right.
Here's a picture of the Maasai of Kenya. They're herdsmen, gatherers of Kenya and Tasmania. Their entire diet consists of meat, cow's milk, and blood, about 300 grams of animal fat per day. They're virtually free of heart disease, blood cholesterol, average only under 160 milligrams per deciliter. Heart disease pretty much unknown till recent times. This is my buddy Graham Aston visiting the Hadza in 2003. You see they're all pretty good shape, these guys.
Mm-hmm.
No big fatties there. If you look at traditional human diets, they're all carnivore based. From the Inuits of Canada and Greenland, which ate seals and fish, Scandinavian Lapps and Sami reindeer, along with the Russian Siberians. North American Plains Indians had the buffalo. Marsh Arabs had camels, along with Saharan Berbers. The Naga of India, pigs. The Maasai that you saw in Samburu, cattle, along with the Argentine gauchos, also had cattle. So here in the lower left in the middle there, you see the Saharan Berbers, the traditional garb. And then you see the modern day ones who were visiting Richmond for the Folk Festival this past fall. And these are guys playing, they had a great band called Bombino. And they're Berbers from, again, North Africa.
Okay.
So all mammals are designed to consume a high-fat diet. Those you think of as carnivores, whether polar bear, lion, or human. That's Gene Charity, by the way. I thought I got a good example human there.
Okay.
And herbivores, which you think is eating grasses, actually essentially have the same, end up with the same diet, you might say. So if you look at ruminants, that is cows, sheep, goats, camels, horses, they all have multiple stomachs that you guys are aware.
Mm-hmm.
They convert vegetable matter to short-chain fatty acids, which are 100% saturated fat, by the way. That nasty saturated fat we hear about.
Right.
So their food's regurgitated and further chewed up, chewed in their cud, and worked back around several times. But this conversion to fatty acids, because of it, the nutrition profile looks like this. 78% of their calories come from fat,
Wow.
20 to 30% come from protein, and 0 comes from carbs, even though they're eating only grass.
Wow.
They have the ability to convert those carbs to fats.
Okay, so it's not a digestive process that transforms it all into fat, even though it's just like.
Yeah. So you look at the gorillas, again, you're not a lower fat gut fermenter like the gorilla, who are fruitarians.
Mm-hmm.
And they convert vegetable fiber into short-chain fatty acids using bacterial fermentation in their cecum. And so they're known as lower gut fermenters. So cecum stores the food material that bacteria are able to break down into cellulose. We've lost the ability to digest cellulose because we no longer have a cecum. So here's the cecum, all this stuff here, we no longer have. The remnant of our cecum, which we've lost, is what we call an appendix.
Okay.
So we digest food mostly in our small intestines.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we looked at the gorilla diet and we looked at calories per gram and the overall energy, so they get out of 1 kilogram, protein is about 47 calories, protein, 30 calories of available carbs, only 4 to 5 calories of fat. But as they convert these short chain fatty acids from the fiber, they get another extra 148 calories. So instead of what you just think was 81 calories, they get 229 calories of energy.
Wow.
So now the profile becomes 20% protein, 13% carbs. And with all that converted short chain fatty acids, 67% of their diet is fat.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So here they are, they're supposed to be this vegetarian. Yeah, again, they're defecating and pooping all day long, 14 times a day. I mean, so
Right.
not pretty safe. So I guess we'd be the same if we were eating all that kind of food all day long too.
Okay. Oh yeah.
So um, that brings us now. So you say, well, okay, so we were once fruitarians. We were that way too. So we should have the same thing as them, but the same. Our it's different now. We don't eat that way. Well, not really so. Here's a study written up in a crack newspaper, the Richmond Times-Dispatch in 2021. Study: 7% of modern human DNA is unique. So just 7% of the modern human genome is actually unique compared to Neanderthals and Denisovans of 40 to 50,000 years ago. Corollary to that is we share 93% of our genetic makeup with these early human species. So we haven't evolved to be something different where we're vegetarians or some other thing.
Mm-hmm.
So the bottom line is we're still them guys. And them guys were meat eating, I should say fat eating, hunter gatherers. The study compared fossil DNA to about 279 modern peoples around the world versus Denisovans. So the Denisovans lived 40,000 to 80,000 years ago in Asia. People in New Guinea, Australia, and Philippines today have about 3 to 5% Denisovan DNA.
Okay.
Most Europeans have about 2 to 4% Neanderthal DNA because that's where they hung out. So to summarize this portion of this fine discussion, our distant cousins, the hominins, adapted to climate change with bipedalism and the change of diet to tubers, stems, and leaves. With scavenging of high-fat content brains and marrow, they grew larger brains.
Mm.
They now had the ability to hunt and kill large game, resulting in a predominantly high-fat carnivore diet. This brought on the dawn of Homo sapiens, or wise man, some 300,000 years ago. And you see here in the lower right, you see a wise man. Looks suspiciously similar to you, Dan.
Yeah.
So modern humans have 93% the same genetic makeup as our hominin ancestors.
Huh.
This can be summed up in a simple equation. Well,
Very simple.
It's the wrong equation, but you guys are well familiar with this. I think you can handle that, being both engineers.
Right.
Here's a simple equation: hominin plus fat plus 2.5 million years equals you.
Okay.
Or in this case, me when I was 27 and wearing a disco shirt.
Yes.
So again, hominin plus fat plus 2.5 million years equals you.
Mm.
All right. So chronic illness is unnatural in the animal kingdom when you think about it. It's unnatural for animals to be chronically sick. I mean, they can get injured and get infected and all that kind of stuff, but not chronically sick with diseases.
Mm-hmm.
So nowhere in the animal kingdom is this the case, except for humans and their domesticated livestock and pets.
Nowhere in the wild. Right.
Right.
Okay.
So once we were healthy, humans are not designed to be unhealthy. For 2.4 million years, as humans led a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, they suffered no diseases of modern man, no cancers, no heart disease, no diabetes, no arthritis, no autoimmune diseases. But something, as my Latin teacher would say in 11th grade, something happened on the way to the forum.
Okay.
That something was agriculture happened.
Okay.
Around 9500 BC, prior to the Egyptian, Roman, and Greek empires, the Natufians led a semi-nomadic life in the Fertile Crescent, which would be Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Iran, and Iraq. They harvested the ancestor of modern wheat called einkorn wheat. And they became less dependent on hunting as they started essentially referred to as farming, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at domestication throughout the world, in the Middle East, they had wheat, barley, sheep, goats, and cattle. Central America, it was maize, beans, and squashes. North China, wheat, rice, millet, soybeans, barley, hemp, chickens, and guinea pigs. Nile Valley, wheat, barley, and sorghum. In the Indies of South America, maize, beans, potatoes, alpaca, and llama.
Okay.
So all this kind of stuff happened roughly around the same time, as you can see there.
Yeah.
Now, some of you may have heard of Utsi, the Iceman. This is a well-preserved body found in the glacier of the Italian Alps in 1991. So he's 5,300 years old, but he had a lot of stuff intact. It wasn't just a skeleton because he was flash frozen essentially.
Wow.
He got nailed by an arrow in the back of the shoulder, and I think the guy came and banged him in the head a few times. But anyways, they were able to look at what he actually ate. And it turns out about 2 hours before he got killed, he had ibex, red deer, and einkorn wheat in his stomach. So he'd already been eating grains.
Mhm.
So they also found out what conditions he had. He had Lyme disease, arthritis, Helicobacter pylori bacteria, which gives you stomach ulcers. He was lactose intolerant. He had calcium deposits in his carotid arteries.
Wow.
So a lot going on. He'd already, and again, this is early weed eater,
Okay.
although he had a pretty varied diet. So I'll tell you about the secret of the mummies. We might consider this the perfect diet, as you will see. Now, some 2,000 mummies were studied. Many of them were robbed, grave robbers took, and they'd already dug up.
Yeah.
So he started studying them. Now, the Syrians called Egyptians artafagawi, or bread eaters, because they're famous for making bread and eating bread. So here was their diet. Whole grain wheat, barley flatbreads, dates, grapes, melons, peaches, pears, olives, carob, apples, nuts, jujube, vegetables and legumes. They had garlic, lettuce, cucumbers, peas, lentils, and papyrus, which was sweetened with honey. They cooked in olive oil, safflower, linseed, and sesame oil. They ate fish and poultry, no red meat. They drank goat's milk, and they made cheese out of it. That's a virtual nutritional nirvana, according to modern day thinking. Could have been his whole entire diet could have taken off any Whole Food shelf in America, except for the papyrus. And so, what was the result of this great diet? So the secret's revealed. They had, with a sad result, really, widespread infectious diseases such as pneumonia and tuberculosis, bacterial infections and infestations. They had tooth decay, gum disease, heart disease, calcified arteries. Medical textbook by Evers, written in 1500 BC, states, if thou examinest the man for illness in his cardia, he has pains in his arms, in his breast, and in one side of his cardia, it is death threatening him. Of course, he's describing a heart attack. So these guys who switched to grains over their natural diet weren't faring so well, even back then.
Okay.
Let's look at our stature in the world. So if you think hunting was tough, I mean, farming produced many serious disadvantages: starvation, epidemic diseases, and malnutrition. So by 3000 BC, humans living on cereal grains, einkorn wheat, and its predecessor, emmer wheat, had lost about 8% in brain volume and 5 inches in height.
Really? Wow.
These effects are still observed in modern cultures around the Fertile Crescent of Egypt, Greece, Turkey, southern Italy, where men are short. So when I visited in 1998 to find our roots, I found them, and here I am with them. I'm about 6'1". Here's my cousin Pietro in the center, who's about 4'11", it looks to be.
Yeah.
And Fernando's about 5'5". You met these guys when you went over.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that was the result of turning to a diet not meant for humans. Mm. So agriculture also led to a stationary lifestyle and large population centers. So there's a good and bad of that. I mean, we evolved special capacities for language, culture, cooperation. So, that's all to the good, right. I suppose you might argue that. But on the bad news side, large population centers and living in close quarters with animals resulted in a host of infectious diseases. Mm. Now we had diphtheria from cattle, leprosy from water buffalo, influenzas from pigs, ducks, and horses, plague, typhus, and possibly smallpox from rats and mice. So things start going bad for us, you might say.
Yeah.
Let me talk a minute about grains and disease. So plants have both physical and biological deterrents, so they're not eaten, essentially.
Right.
So these protective strategies in the physical sense are unpleasant textures or sticky resins and saps, hard coatings, spiny leaves. And biological deterrents are lectins and phytates that can poison and paralyze the prey. So lectins, which you get when you eat grains, cause gaps in our intestinal wall. We know it as leaky gut syndrome. Right. And also disrupt cellular communication. Then there's phytates, which prevent absorption of minerals. So, these minerals don't get them absorbed because of phytates. And these are also often called anti-nutrients. So whole grains contain these defense chemicals in their husk, hulls, and bran. And in short, I would have to tell you that the vaunted whole grains are probably worse than the highly processed empty calorie versions previously recommended.
Because we're actually ingesting
all these
defense mechanisms from the plants.
Right. Yeah. Now, on the other hand, the other stuff that's been stripped of anything that's the whole grain stuff, you're getting quicker absorption in the small intestine from the sugar in it, but the carbs convert quickly to sugar.
Mm.
So when the gut lining is compromised, though, we have big trouble. So most of our autoimmune diseases, like Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, lupus, multiple sclerosis, rheumatic arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, are all attributed to foreign matter getting into the bloodstream through junctures in the small intestine. So here you see the villi of the small intestines magnified a whole bunch. You see the outer endothelial layer there, single cell layer, these little gaps. These gaps are what get big and allowing stuff, not just nutrients, but food particles and all the stuff that causes all these autoimmune diseases. So if you took our small intestines, which are over 20 feet long, and all these little villi surrounding each one of them, if you unfolded it all, wrapped it all, you have surface area of a tennis court.
Wow.
So now you have a surface area of a tennis court with real small, fine permeability, you might say, for stuff to get in. And now we've destroyed that permeability, and now all kinds of stuff's getting right into our bloodstream. So right from here, boom, it's into your bloodstream. It's often run into all your organs and everything else. So it's cause of so many diseases because we're eating, again, something that humans had never meant to eat. According to Jay Diamond, Discover May 1987, the adoption of agriculture was the worst mistake in the history of the human race.
Wow. Okay.
But we made things worse.
Much worse.
Much worse. Thank you, Dan. Enter Ansel Keys, physiologist from Minnesota. Highly regarded scientist since the government had him devise rations for the troops. So he called these rations, this is rations you send the troops out if they're on the battlefield for days and they take the food with them.
Right.
And he called them K rations for keys, I guess. And as you can see, part of the K rations, this good food we're supposed to eat, the troops included Chesterfield cigarettes. So they knew nothing about heart attack, at least about smoking and heart disease, apparently. And they gave him Ansel gave him 3 cigarettes to go on their merry way. You can't read this subtitle here, but it says you may use this waterproof container for matches and cigarettes. So they gave you the box of the food came in. You can pack your cigarettes and stuff in there to keep it dry.
Mm-hmm.
So this guy became President Eisenhower's consultant back when he had his first heart attack in September of 1955. And of course, he was consulting him that, as you'll see, fat is bad. And so he religiously avoided saturated fat and switched to Melba toast with polyunsaturated margarine, which is unhealthy oil, until he died later in 1958 of heart disease.
So this guy came up with the fat is bad kind of thing.
Oh yeah, I'll show you right here. All right, so yeah, missing the slide. Huh? Yep. Okay, missing the slide, but no. Essentially, he came up. I'll go back to this one here. What he called the diet heart hypothesis.
Okay.
In a nutshell, he says animal fat contains dietary cholesterol. Saturated fat and dietary cholesterol raises blood cholesterol levels. Increased blood cholesterol clogs arteries, and clogged arteries cause heart attacks. Of course, this has never been proven by any study, just so you know.
Ever. Yeah.
Yeah. So he went around to all these countries and studied. He took and he looked at, he just at a gross measure how much stuff they buy that's containing fat. So it's not a very scientific thing. But he compared heart disease per 100,000, right here, versus percent total calories from fat in males age 55 to 59. So this is 1950. Now, as an engineer, Dan and Derek, you'd be looking at these data points and you'd say it's like there's no trend to it. It's like we call it a scatter plot, right?
Right, yeah.
And if we were to do a regression analysis where we had a least squares trend line, we would assume that if there's some correlation of the data, it would go up like this or go down. But if you look at that trend line, it's pretty much a flat line. There's no trend.
Okay.
That didn't bother this guy. But you see these ones I have highlighted here in blue. I'm here in yellow now. He cherry picked the data and he got rid of just 21 studies. He got rid of all the other, he kept the US, Canada, Australia, UK, Italy, and Japan. And he came up with what he called the 6-country study. Ta-da! He published this in 1953.
Wow.
Now, he didn't consider other factors, for example, like smoking cigarettes, which they didn't think had anything to do with health or heart disease. He didn't look at, cars in whatever region, and exhaust from cars, consumption of sugar, which is huge, or margarine. He didn't any of that stuff. It's like all about how much fat did you have. So here you have it again: coronary heart disease, deaths per thousand uh, versus fat. And you can see, in his view, the more fat you ate, the more heart disease you had. Cherry picking this data. Here you see two other data points just going on here. Finland's way over here, nowhere close to the line. Neither is France on the other end of the spectrum, nowhere close to the line. So he was pronounced the most important nutrition scientist of the 20th century, and he's on the cover of Time magazine. Him and his partner in crime, colleague Jeremiah Stamler, maneuvered their way onto the American Heart Association Nutrition Committee in 1961, convincing that the diet heart hypothesis should prevail, which I just read to you. So he advised cutting dietary fat from the current average of about 40% to 15%, with saturated fat cut from 17% to 4%.
Based on manipulated data.
Based on his manipulated data. Another study was done pretty much back at that same time called the Minnesota Coronary Experiment, 1968 to 1975. Here was randomized controlled trial. This is the mother of all trials, where you have two groups, placebo group and a group given something else. Neither the doctors or the patients know which one they're given.
Okay.
So they had 9,000 participants. They replaced saturated fat with polyunsaturated fat, linoleic acid. Here's the result. There was a 22% higher risk of death for each 30 milligram per deciliter reduction in serum cholesterol. Whoa. Well, that's kind of the opposite of what this guy was saying about how fat cholesterol is bad, because they're saying as cholesterol goes down, well, they're saying there's higher risk of death for each 30 milligram per deciliter reduction in serum cholesterol.
Yeah, your risk of dying goes up as your cholesterol goes down.
Yeah, so they're saying cholesterol, your blood cholesterol is high. That's a marker for heart disease.
Yeah.
But his saying totally the opposite.
Yeah, completely.
So here's one of the author's comments. Available evidence from randomized controlled trials shows that replacement of saturated fat in the diet with linoleic acid effectively lowers serum cholesterol, but does not support the hypothesis that translates to a lower risk of death from coronary heart disease or all causes.
Okay.
The opposite of what they're trying to prove.
Yeah.
Now, who read this MCE study, you might ask? Well, the answer is no one until decades later.
Okay.
Here's a headline from the article in Scientific America. Records found in Dusty Basement undermine decades of dietary advice. The Dusty Basement is Ansel Keys. The raw data was unearthed by Christopher Ramsden, National Institutes of Health. Data not published until 2016, 43 years later.
Wow.
And the author of the Minnesota Coronary Experiment, our buddy Ansel Keys, the most important nutrition scientist in the 20th century.
So he had this information. He
did the study.
Wow.
It didn't come up with he didn't like the answer,
Yeah.
and so he hid it. And so they had people after he died going through his stuff in the basement. They wait, after this thing off, say, what's this?
Wow.
There you go. So one of the lead authors of the MCE reanalysis, Daisy Zamora, subsequently stated, had this research been published 40 years ago, it might have changed the trajectory of diet heart research and recommendations.
For sure.
And so the scam began. Messiah researcher Dr. George Mann called the lipid heart hypothesis the public health diversion of the century, the greatest health scam in the history of medicine.
Wow.
Of course, no one bought into that. He got thrown to the curb like so many others.
Sure. Yeah, they tend to do that.
So in 1977, George McGovern head of the Senate Select Committee on Nutrition and Human Needs. By the way, this committee had just been set up for some other thing, I can't remember. They finished that study and they said, oh, well, what else can we tell people how to live? For the first time, we're going to tell you how to eat.
Right.
They published dietary goals for the United States. They cited USDA data on consumption. And this gave rise to their crowning achievement. Ready for this? Probably know what it is.
Thinking I know what it is. Yeah.
The 1980 food pyramid. This was not drawn up by dietitians, but by a government agency. And look what we have here. Okay, so we're supposed to eat 6 to 11 servings per day of crackers, bread, cereals, hot or cold, 6 to 11 servings every day, then 3 to 5 servings of veggies, 2 to 4 servings of fruit, maybe a little bit of maybe 2 to 3 servings of meat, poultry, fish, beans, eggs, nuts, all those things with good protein and fat. And same with cheeses and so forth, milk and yogurt. Then stay away from those oils and sweets.
And fats.
So that was our what they told us to do. And the result, the sad result. This is the percent of overweight and obese people in the US from the Center for Disease Control. Here's percent of population on the left with time. And you see how right about here, things shot up. And now we're at 75% overweight and obese.
That's incredible. Wow.
It's incredible. And so what happened right here, Dan? You recall what happened in 1980?
1980, that food pyramid.
The old food pyramid came out. And look what we did. So they said, fat is bad, eat a bunch of carbs, 6 to 11 servings, and here we are today. Ooh. Now, based on this data, Dan, Derek, what dietary advice should we be giving people in the year 2011, would you think?
Hey, this is wrong. Let's change it up a bit because this is insane.
Well, that's illogical, but let's not deal in logic at this time. We came up with a new thing called My Plate.
Okay.
So 30 years after bad advice, what our government concocted the very same advice with a different shape. So you have a bunch of grains, a bunch of veggies, you have some protein and some fruit. Doesn't say anything about fat, and just doesn't say anything about fat. Even dairy, which has some fat. Of course, they want it to be low fat. Mm-hmm. And so then he gave the same advice 10 years later.
Just make it look different. Yeah.
And you see the result, still nothing. Now, our good buddy Anthony Fauci, Dr. Fauci of other fame, he said, hey, we haven't heard any dietary advice from the government for a decade now. He commissioned Tufts University to do a study to say, okay, let's look at what should we tell people nowadays. And they came up with something called the food compass. And this is just a sample of the food compass. I'm not making this up.
Oh, yes, I remember hearing about this, yeah.
So, if it's green, so they went through thousands of foods and different categories and rated them from 0 to 100. So 100 is great. So anything from like 80 to 78, 75 to 100, green, eat as much as you want. If it's yellow, moderate. If it's red, avoid it. So again, meat, cheese, eggs, beef, meat, fat is bad. Breakfast cereals, sweet potato fries, good. So here you have Cheerios, it's a 95. It's a processed cereal grain.
Yeah.
Here's sweet potatoes. Here's fried food. Score 69. Eat in moderation. And of course, you have Lucky Charms with pure sugar.
Yeah.
Eat that in moderation. As opposed, now if you're gonna eat something, do Lucky Charms, but it's really not a beef patty. That would not be good.
No way. Cheerios over beef.
Oh. Wow. So since the 1980 food pyramid came out, obesity has doubled, diabetes has increased 7-fold. We essentially managed to stay slim for 2.5 million years on a high-fat diet, but suddenly, as of 45 years ago, 30% of us have become obese and 75% overweight or obese. So to summarize, stop the big fat lie, eat what's natural to humans. The scavenging of high-fat content brains and marrow, Homo sapiens grew large brains. 10 to 12,000 years ago, humans started cultivating grains, a mismatch with our human digestive system. Ansel Keys with bogus data convinced the American Heart Association that dietary fat was responsible for heart disease and told us to limit fat. The government's 1980 food pyramid told us to eat high-carb diet of mostly cereal grains, fruits, and vegetables. Much to their delight, big food replaced fat with sugar and cheap oils. This resulted in a fatter and sicker population with no change in sight. And lastly, there are 2 types of animal. Herbivores eat plants, carnivores eat herbivores. Homo sapiens are 95% carnivore. It would take another 10,000 generations if we're going to change that. And there you see in the lower right, a famous carnivore, Derek Stephen. And with that, I'll end this thing. And I don't know if you have any questions, but it's a pretty sad story when you think about it.
Yeah.
Because again, well, that curve, all those people shown on that curve, that represents thousands of deaths. People without legs and
Oh yeah,
people doing dialysis, and
sure.
just very sad, really.
Yeah, which is big business in America, the medical industry that thrives off of.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah. So the statin biz. We can do heart disease at another time, but statin industry just in the U.S. alone is like 18 billion a year. So
wow.
they're not going to tell you that fat is not bad for you.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that we can get into what's good for you. Well, we'll see some of the crazy things that we're still telling people to eat, but also what things you can eat. In another session, perhaps we can do that. If you want.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, now that we've exposed the truth,
Yeah, big fat lie.
what can we do about it, right? That's definitely a good follow-up. We can
All right.
go through that. Yeah, very cool.
Great talk and great way to explain all of this for us and bring it full circle.
Pretty sad, but that's what's out there. It still lives on, as you can see, with the food compass. That's nothing's going to change for a good
Yeah.
while.
It's
Unless they
amazing.
get off of that.
It's amazing that they don't look back at longer than 100 years ago, like how successful the human diet was
Yeah.
before it became
Yeah.
processed and promoted as the wrong portions for the wrong things. Yeah.
Well, the next talk, of course, the other thing that came on was processed oils and a bunch of sugar, and that's huge too. We'll get into that next go around, perhaps.
Okay. Yeah.
Very good.
So, what are some quick recommendations that we can take away, though, before we get into that, as far as things to avoid and
Well,
what to go for?
all the sugar in its zillion forms. I mean, everything. So, got the high carb diet. That's a lot of it's void of calories. All the additives and all the stuff they're throwing in that's not good for our system. I mean, again, our relatives, they weren't eating, wasn't so much a high meat diet as we'd think. It's really a high fat diet. Now,
Yeah, right.
I try to do some chicken livers wrapped in bacon. I can do that. I can do beef liver mixed up with onions and things like that. I'm kind of getting used to that. But
Okay.
these guys just sat there and raw.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
just
Yeah.
tearing away at hearts and livers and all that stuff. And
Yeah.
as you'll see in the next one, folks like the Inuits, they eat that, and they threw the meat to the dogs. The hindquarters. Unless they were starving, they weren't eating meat.
Yeah.
it was all.
It's not what's sustaining them. Yeah.
And here we're told by someone that fat is bad for you. It's really what made us human. I mean,
It's what people thrived off of and created our evolution of who we are.
it's how we became human, and
Wow.
we're saying no, don't do it now.
Yeah.
And
Well, even just using the term carnivore or meat eater is false in the sense the way they say it, because we're actually eating the fat, the organs. It's not necessarily just the raw meat. So it's the way they even interpret that is wrong in a sense.
well, and again, and I'll get into that next time around. But you have this paradigm, the French paradox. Oh, they eat all this fat. How come they're so healthy? They eat all this fat because they're eating fat. That's why they're better off than us. And you saw in that chart, France was way down there. It was the anomaly that they can't explain.
Yeah.
The big paradox. So again, and if you I just went to the Korean market, they have all this stuff. They have whole, calf hearts and all these organs and all stuff. Well, a lot of other cultures still eat a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
And we think it's because the Orientals are eating a bunch of rice. Well, they ate their rice, but they're eating a lot of stuff that with good fish stuff too, of course. A lot of stuff it's so cheap, and it's cheap. You've got market things most nutritious is the cheapest, and no one's buying it. We're buying something. We're trying to buy. Can't afford some big steak, and we're eating some juiced up steak where the cow's been fed grains and antibiotics, and we're getting all that stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we're in a bad way right now. Huh? Now maybe Robert Kennedy Jr. is going to get around some of the stuff and expose some. I hope so.
Yeah. I think he's
Seems
to have a good agenda, something in mind for us. So hopefully something good rolls out of that. We'll see some more information, new information that may be more widely accepted.
Yeah, but my talking about basic nutrients, he's actually going off all the other stuff they've thrown at us. It's not ever meant for human ingestion. And
Yeah. Well, get cut out those toxins first, and then talk.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. This was
Pleasure.
really
This
informative.
is great.
I definitely learned a lot. And so,
I've watched my share of Shred,
yeah,
and got to be on this time. Do it again.
yeah, for sure.
All right, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Great.
Now, I want you to ask yourself, what I've told you, is it going to make any difference in your life? You better wake up, better change, get interested, changing your life.